This is the story of a 21st century technology nightmare, about how easy it is to be caught in a trap you never knew existed.
I was just attacked. It was just awful.
About how you can go from being at the peak of your career one day to losing nearly everything the next.
This is injustice at the extreme. This is a man who had been dealt an appalling hand by the system.
I've had my times of being very angry. I think I spent the first few months after it all happened in complete shock.
He trashed his family, his life, his career, and at the end of it, he's got nothing.
Tim Jenkinson was at the top of his game, a respected primary school principal on Auckland's North Shore.
Oh, beautiful play.
A dad with great kids, a devoted husband, a credit to his profession. Here he was in 2004, his school, Bayview Primary, showcased on TVNZ's Sunday program as a place of imaginative learning.
Tell me what you've learned today.
I learned how to multiply big numbers together using different strategies.
I don't think many people would doubt that he was probably one of the most respected primary school principals in the Auckland region.
They're a delightful age group because they're so much like sponges. They disconnect and you can make them more confident.
And I'd like you to
All the time Tim was building up his students' confidence, somewhere in far-off places, another kind of student was at work. Students of cyberspace, computer geeks. Tim Jenkinson was a name that meant nothing to the virus makers in Bangkok, Rio or Vladivostok, but Tim was well and truly in the telescopic sights of a cyber weapon. Glenfield, Averageville, Auckland's North Shore. Tim believed that a school that was going to be more than average needed, among other things, to have leading protection from internet nasties.
I'd heard some horror stories of what had happened to computers and how there would be stuff coming in that we didn't want kids to see.
Underlining Tim's concerns was the fact that his work on his own school-supplied laptop was occasionally being interrupted by pop-ups of pornographic images.
Basically, it was naked people. That's what basically it was, naked people coming up. And the first time I clicked it, it shut down and went away. And as it went over the month, it became increasingly more difficult to shut down. As soon as you click on the cross, which is in Windows, it would go to another site, and then it would go to another site, another site, another site. That's right, that's right.
Tim's wife Vicky said she heard him on the phone from home complaining to someone at the school about the pop-ups.
When he said there were pop-ups coming in, well, I knew there were because we'd seen stuff on our computer before we had it cleaned.
I was trying to shut this down, and I said, look, it's getting worse. But he said, we'll fix it and we'll go away.
Want free smileys? Click the button.
Pop-ups are a hassle for anyone who uses a computer. They're uninvited pages that literally pop up. If you're tempted by a pop-up to look further, it can be really hard to shut down the resulting flood of images.
It was frustrating for him because he'd get enough emails and work that he had to do on the computer without stuff coming in, and then it's very difficult to get rid of it.
In Tim's case, bizarre things were happening. Once, when he was actually studying verses from an online Bible, a search involving the word purity appears to have led his computer system into an adult content ad server. Tim weighed up the options for improving the security of the school's computer network, and in the end Bayview went with an option called School Zone, a telecom service designed to keep school computers safe.
I went on a training course myself with it, and it showed me what it would do and how it would protect our school, and I thought, gee, that sounds good, especially if we can pay in telecom points.
In mid-July 2006, once the upgrade of the school's computers was complete, 3 teachers from Bayview Primary returned from an IT administration course and decided to try out their newfound knowledge by examining the content filter logs of computer users at the school. The logs showed inappropriate internet sites had been accessed by their principal.
The Board of Trustees chairperson came to me, this is the first I'd heard of it, and said, someone's been trying to access pornographic sites. And I said, oh my goodness, is that right? And he said, yes, and it's you.
Tim was confronted with what his colleagues believed was conclusive evidence he'd been accessing porn.
And I went through the records because I was absolutely shocked. And they said, no, we've got conclusive evidence that it must be you.
He was told to keep it confidential, but I knew. I mean, we've been married a long time at that point, 19 years. I knew something was up.
Tim Jenkinson felt his life was spiralling out of control. He started out very sure in his own mind he'd never deliberately accessed pornography on any computer. Tim says his Board of Trustees chairman, Paul Appley, had told him that this was a serious affair, but Tim's impression was the school felt it could ride it out.
He'd talked to a number of people, apparently. He'd talked to the School Trustees Association, the ministry and the legal people. This is all before he'd come and see me. And he then said, well, we'll just make it all confidential. He said, I'm going to tell the staff it must be confidential. And we've dealt with it in an appropriate way and leave it at that.
Board of Trustees Chairman Mr. Appley has refused to comment. So what was the nature of the material found on Tim's computer? It was graphic, however it wasn't child pornography, and it was extremely low in picture quality.
I'm totally against pornography because of what it does to women and what it does to children. And the kind of relationships people break down as a result of it.
Tim then made the first of two really costly errors. First, he accepted what he understood to be the Board of Trustees' advice to let it all blow over.
I wish he'd just come home and said, look, this is what's happened, this is what I've been accused of.
The second mistake followed logically. Thinking he'd have support, Tim conceded in letters to fellow staff that perhaps he may have been under so much stress that he really did do something wrong and now simply couldn't remember it.
I guess it's somewhat ironic, don't you think, that going after the protection that I wanted was the very thing that brought it all out.
But if he thought his colleagues would back him up and that everything would turn out okay, Tim and Vicky were to be sadly mistaken.
Whether it's in the school system or not. You know, the old saying of, that you're innocent until proven guilty, well, didn't happen.
The story was about to go public. Tim would learn the depths of humiliation and would face financial and professional ruin. He and his family were also about to learn they were part of an international fraternity of internet victims.
I like to call this the new modern-day Salem witch trials.
That on the other side of the world, other hapless teachers and people leading otherwise ordinary lives are being professionally and emotionally destroyed by a new kind of paranoia. Primary school principal Tim Jenkinson had been accused of deliberately accessing porn on his school laptop. Tim said no way, and he cited the fact that he'd previously reported problems with porn pop-ups on his computer. Tim and Vicky Jenkinson, a church-going couple with 3 sons, were devastated by the charges.
I dragged our pastor over and I sat him down and I said, I've got some questions to ask my husband and I need you to witness them because I can be quite direct. And I did. I asked him a multitude of things and I knew the answer anyway before I asked him, but I was going to ask him.
Tim and Vicky trusted each other, but it was all about to turn nasty. Vicky picked up the answer phone message from the New Zealand Herald.
They were running a story and that they were running it on the front page, and that was probably my shock that this whole thing had got out of hand. Yeah. And then, of course, Monday morning it was on the front page of the paper.
Someone at Bayview School had told the Herald that Tim had been accessing porn on his school computer.
I was just a mess. I have to say I was an absolute emotional mess. Because I thought I'd somehow lost my marbles. Somehow I'd become this terrible person that had gone and looked at pornography, which I'd hated for so long.
And I then straight away rang the deputy principal of our older 2 boys' school and told him what was going on and just asked him to look out for our boys. And I rang another friend who removed the newspapers from the staff room.
Tim Jenkinson had started to doubt himself. He knew he had memory problems, the after effects of a stroke a couple of years earlier. Had that led to him doing things he now couldn't recall?
At that point in stage, I wasn't prepared to sort of say I was going crazy and couldn't remember anything. I mean, you don't do that as a leader because it totally, completely takes any security people have away.
The story, meantime, began to take on a life of its own.
They took it further. They did a poll on me whether I should keep my job or not. Talkback, apparently, I had heard from another people, the talkback were all talking about whether I should lose my job or get my, and what should happen to me.
The tide of opinion among teachers at the school, the board of trustees and among parents quickly turned against Tim. The hate mail started.
I had a postcard with a lascivious kind of picture with lace tights and things sent to me by 3 concerned mothers, please resign. I was a disgrace to Bayview School and should resign.
It was going to be a storm beyond anyone's ability to weather. Any support base Tim thought he could count on was collapsing.
These people had known Tim for 12, 13 years, some people longer in his profession. They knew us as a family. We'd spent time together. How could you be so stupid? You are intelligent people. How could you not investigate this further?
But you could hardly blame Bayview staff for their confusion. Tim was falling on his sword by degrees. He started saying sorry to everyone, including his school colleagues.
I wrote a letter, handwrote them, because at that point I was convinced I must have done it. I thought I'd gone completely insane.
Tim says the chairman of Bayview's board of trustees came to his home and updated him. This is what he claims the chairman said.
He came round and he said, on the record, he said, there was nothing you have done that would warrant anyone being to dismiss you. But off the record, I need to tell you the board wishes you to resign. And he said, well, I just need to tell you a few things. He said, I've had phone calls, my wife's had menacing phone calls, my children have, my parents have. And he said, we just can't take any more.
The then chairman, Paul Appley, has refused to answer questions about Tim's departure. The current board of trustees have issued a statement saying Tim admitted accessing inappropriate material and apologised. The board says Tim resigned and his resignation was accepted. End of story.
The whole thing was tough. I didn't know who I could trust. Certainly didn't trust anyone else that he worked with.
The hardest thing about that was I did not have a chance to say goodbye to the kids, who I was really in there for and always had been and been fierce advocates for.
Tim had no job and he ended up on a sickness benefit. Luckily, he still had friends, and they were friends who knew about computers. Warren Anderson and Skip Parker were 2 IT specialists with nearly 50 years computer experience between them. They'd seen the media coverage about Tim and came to his aid. But Warren had strict conditions for Tim.
When we had a chat with Tim, I said, look, what's going to happen here is I'm going to start looking at this whole scenario and potentially I'm going to get my hands really dirty. I mean, we're dealing with porn here. This is not a popular subject. I said, if I find anything that suggests to me you have been anything but above board, Skip and I are out of this in a minute and you're on your own.
Skip and Warren went to work examining the hard drive on Tim's laptop. They found the hundreds of pornographic images all right, but they also found the laptop was riddled with Trojans, doors for porn to come through.
As it turned out, there were 6 porn Trojans on Tim's machine.
Months of IT detective work convinced them all the porn was there because of the viruses and not deliberate downloads.
I'd be quite happy to stake my reputation on what we found in Tim's stuff, purely because the evidence is so clear.
They found the genial headmaster had downloaded a smiley to add to a friendly email, and in the process he'd potentially trashed his own career.
When he downloaded and installed the smileys, they invited 2 friends and they invited 2 friends, and they were not nice friends. When he installed them, it also installed a number of other pieces of software, one which, if you read the install agreement, says that we will download to your machine adult material. We might destroy your machine, we might install stuff that you don't like.
This kind of virus infestation can lead to just about anyone being accused of accessing porn. But Tim was still in major trouble. He would need a lawyer, a crusader. Lawyer Andrew Hooker, a guy with a kind heart, decided he'd take on Tim's case basically for free. When he started looking at the affair, a lot of things didn't make sense.
Yeah, a cynic would say that it seems rather strange that someone who was allegedly downloading enormous amounts of pornography on his computer would be so insistent that the virus and inappropriate content filter in the school be upgraded. Yeah, it'd be like a turkey voting for an early Christmas, wouldn't it?
Andrew's faith in Tim was being bolstered by the discovery that porn had been coming in when Tim wasn't even near his computer.
The most blatant case was that there was a Saturday when Tim and his family and the dog were out at the beach because they had an open home. In the meantime, his laptop was at the school downloading porno.
Andrew was also completely unfazed by the fact that Tim had written those letters to fellow teachers, apologising for actions which the guys now looking at his computer were saying he probably didn't do.
He was confronted with evidence and told, "You must have done it because this is on your computer." He still could not remember it, but he thought, well, maybe I did do it. I don't think it's naive.
There was a larger dimension to all this unfolding on the other side of the world. In America, people's lives are being ruined by false allegations of accessing porn. In one case, a woman teacher from Connecticut, her plight eerily similar to Tim's, was facing a 40-year jail term for having allegedly exposed school kids to pornography. Julie Amero, her own life in tatters, wanted to tell Tim Jenkinson to face reality.
I'd probably tell Tim to run as far from the school district as possible. No teacher today should ever have a computer in their classroom.
Julie was the unlucky victim of an encounter with an unsafe computer and an overzealous system that nearly cost her her life. Wyndham, rural Connecticut. Julie Amero and her husband Wes are watching some of the story of Tim Jenkinson, 15,000 kilometres away in New Zealand. For this 42-year-old former teacher, it's all horribly familiar.
Someone's been trying to access pornographic sites. That's you. I said, pardon?
For Julie, it happened about half an hour down the highway in Norwich, Connecticut, at Kelly Middle School, where Julie turned up as a relieving teacher to a class of youngsters. Two girls were looking at a computer terminal in her classroom.
I was passing papers to the desks, and I got back and I looked at the computer to see what they were looking at, and there was sites, little different, like 3 or 4 boxes with little red X's in the corner, and they were kind of lewd sites.
Flustered and confused, Julie tried to make the sites go away.
So all I'd ever been taught by my husband was to click the red X and it goes away. So I click, 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 click. And after every click, more and more and more came.
Julie had reported the problem to the school.
It seemed like she had followed pretty much textbook procedure for a substitute teacher. Gone and identified the problem, asked other teachers for help, went to the principal, told the principal, identified the issue.
But Julie and Wes had no warning of what was to happen next. Kelly Middle School dismissed Julie from their service and called the Norwich police.
As soon as I walked into the police station, they had told me it was 10 counts of risk of injury. Took my picture.
Julie Amero, substitute teacher, was soon in court facing charges that could have earned her 40 years in jail.
In about 3 weeks, a substitute teacher from Norwich will be sentenced for exposing her students to pornography in her classroom.
The trial was a nightmare for Julie and Wes, a school system ducking for cover over virus-infected school computers, and a police department happy to come along for the ride.
And they lied through their teeth. The software had not been updated. They used the Cheyenne antivirus software that had expired in April of the year before.
The cop who'd supposedly inspected the school computer and gone after Julie was Mark Lounsbury. His expertise, based on 1 hour's experience on computer forensics using a $29 teach-yourself piece of software. By now, a local reporter was starting to look at what was going on in sheer disbelief.
It almost seemed like everybody was ganging up on this woman.
The trial ended with guilty verdicts on all 4 counts.
I looked at every juror, at every face, and I stopped and I just thought, how could this happen in the world that we live in today? Where is the justice? I didn't do this, and I'm going to jail, and I didn't do this.
All that the City of Norwich had to figure out was how long the substitute teacher would spend in jail. Julie got so sick she ended up in hospital with heart failure and lost her baby.
We've been trying for 4 years, and it finally happened. And then the stress from this case made us lose the baby.
When you see your wife with a tube in her nose and wrapped up in a blanket, I
couldn't breathe.
That's a hopeless feeling. It's one that I hope I never see again.
But suddenly, the judge in Julie's case quashed the guilty verdicts. She found that Detective Lounsbury had given erroneous evidence. Julia Mero still faced the possibility that the police would put her through a whole new trial. Columnist Rick Green says the sheer ineptitude of the investigation into Julie's case was breathtaking.
That this single officer's investigation could become the essence to possibly send a woman to jail for 40 years is astonishing.
Had you ever previously, to that time or since, deliberately accessed pornography on the internet?
Never. Never.
The parallels with the case of Tim Jenkinson in New Zealand are striking. A couple of dozen IT experts around the US heard about the threat that still hung over Julie, and they went to work on her behalf.
It immediately jumped out to them. These are computer security professionals who work for, eBay and major software manufacturers, who immediately they saw what this was going on here with this issue of spyware downloaded on the computer, taking over the computer.
The police were forced to do a proper forensic analysis of the school computer's hard drive.
Eventually, it was the state police major crime squad that got a hold of the hard drive after the verdict was overturned. They reviewed the hard drive and brought back the evidence that said Julie didn't do this intentionally.
But the prosecutors left Julie and Wes hanging. As long as the charges could potentially be laid against her again, her life remained in a cruel limbo. Limbo too for Tim Jenkinson back in New Zealand. As soon as any prospective employer found out what Tim was accused of doing, suddenly the door was slammed firmly shut.
I was ready to just walk away from education altogether and just leave it all behind and try and get on with some sort of new life.
By now, the Teachers' Council had charged Tim with serious misconduct for viewing porn and not taking strong enough action to deal with the pop-ups.
The council is looking specifically at the registration and the continuing membership of the profession. So the most severe penalty from the council's view is to cancel registration.
The Teachers' Council ordered up a new check on the laptop. It was done by PricewaterhouseCoopers in Wellington. Pricewaterhouse had technology that wasn't available to Tim's own IT experts. They went through his hard drive line by line, months of work. And what Warren and Skip found was scary.
It was intermittent. At one point, there were 2.5 pictures a second arriving on his machine.
The evidence, says Warren, was mounting that Tim was a victim of virulent Trojans that were downloading the porn into his laptop.
Often the activity would happen 10 minutes after Tim walked away from his machine. So he'd have a compulsory principal-teachers meeting, and 10 minutes after he should have left his office, his machine would start surfing for porn.
All the evidence screams at a third-party Trojan or virus that has gone through and started downloading this content. The deeper we look, the more time we spend on it, the evidence just gets clearer and clearer.
But it's even more sinister than that, really. As with the Smiley example, lots of websites look innocent enough, but can be portals for porn. Skip Parker showed us how it can happen.
We wanted to prove that we could push images onto people's machines without their knowledge. So we came up with a couple of demonstrations on a website that we created. The first example I'll show you is the hidden images example.
Someone working away blissfully on a computer may think that what they see on their screen is all that's happening on their terminal at that moment. Not so. Your computer can be downloading heaps of stuff that you don't even see unless someone delves into your hard drive.
And you can see that it's actually downloaded tphoto.jpg, which is a picture file. Now that image is on the page there, you just can't see it at all, because what we've done is we've set it to have a width of 0 and a height of 0, so it's basically hidden. The second example we have is of bulk downloads of images. Now in this example, again, the page has just basic text at the top, but there are no images on here. Again, if we go into the activity feature of Safari, we can see that it is in fact in the background going to Google Images and downloading images of Finding Nemo. Here we have the page that it's downloaded in the background onto this machine. This is a great example also of thumbnails. Small images, and those were predominantly the images that were on Tim's machine. All of the images have been saved onto this machine.
Only in Tim Jenkinson's case, it wasn't cute little Nemo coming on board, but rather some pretty serious porn. And the motivation for people who slip this stuff through cyberspace and onto your computer? Many adverts, seen or unseen, that manage to worm their way into your hard drive earn the distributor a fee from the porn master.
We guessed his machine probably visited 80 sites. If you assume each of those was an advert, what's that, 80, 50 cents each? So there's $40 just from him, and you've got 10,000 other machines potentially lying around doing the same stuff. You're doing okay.
No consolation for the Jenkinsons, as, tired and broke, they got ready to move to another rental house. Vicky has had to go to hospital. She's been severely stressed and has had a hysterectomy.
Yeah, she had surgery this week.
Vicky always knew she'd have to have the operation. The drama they've been living with has made it all the more urgent. Tim and his team could take some small comfort from the knowledge that an international awareness of this problem of so-called malware is gathering momentum. Tim was about to have his case examined by one of America's foremost computer forensic specialists.
Oh my God. It's just ridiculous that this even came to be.
She would find exact parallels with cases destroying lives in the US. It seems an unlikely place for one of America's busiest computer experts to hang out. But Tucson, Arizona is definitely home for Tami Loehrs. In this desert town, crammed full of healthy young families pursuing the American dream, Tami is way busier than she wants to be, helping people accused of grubby crimes.
I like to call this the new modern day Salem witch trials. That's the level that this is getting to. It used to be 5-6 years ago, I may see 1 or 2 of these cases, and now I'm literally seeing several cases a day. I mean, I'm getting new cases every day, every week. It's exponentially growing. With the internet and the ease of which these things can happen, with viruses and Trojans, it's exploding out there.
Perhaps Tami's most celebrated case recently has been the work she did helping a man from Massachusetts prove his innocence on charges of downloading child porn to his work-supplied laptop. Michael Fiola has been through exactly the same kind of ordeal as Tim Jenkinson in New Zealand and Julia Mero in Massachusetts. It started for Michael here in Boston, 3 months after he was issued with a laptop by his employers, the Department of Industrial Accidents.
Michael believes that all the virus protections being updated, that laptop is in constant communication with the office. One day he gets a knock on his door and says, you're losing your job. And he's shocked, and they say, well, you have pornography, you have child pornography on your computer.
Americans, like people in any civilized society, are revolted by the idea of child pornography. It rates right up there as one of the worst things you can be accused of.
He ends up with charges by the state. Now he's looking at criminal charges for possessing this. This whole thing blows up. He loses his friends, his family, is shocked that, he's a child pornographer.
But a detailed examination of Mike Fiola's computer by Tami found that he, like Tim Jenkinson, had had his laptop flooded with viruses and Trojans that traveled through cyberspace into his life and wrecked it. Tami helped Michael prove that at crucial times when porn was supposedly being deliberately downloaded to his laptop, Michael was miles away, having dinner at a restaurant.
The reason they got into his computer is because the IT department at the DIA set it up incorrectly when they handed it to him. They forgot to change a simple username so that it never did communicate with the office anymore. So it wasn't being updated, it wasn't being protected, but it was a wide open doorway for anyone to get into.
We wanted to talk to Michael Fiola in Massachusetts. He tells us he's been so emotionally destroyed by his battle to prove his innocence, he couldn't bring himself to go on camera.
They won't give him his job back, nor does he want his job back. So now he's looking at, a new career. Their funds are gone. I mean, it's, he's got nothing. He's got nothing.
Tami was fascinated to look at the report Warren Anderson and Skip Parker had done on the contents of the hard drive on Tim Jenkinson's laptop.
It's just ridiculous that this even came to be. The comment that because the user was logged in as Tim J, that it must be Tim, Tim who did the activity is absurd. Absolutely absurd. The fact that there were viruses and Trojans activity happening when he wasn't around, when he could confirm he was at meetings. This kind of stuff should be done from the get-go.
We asked Tami to draw comparisons between Tim's case and that of Michael Fiola.
Very similar to Michael Fiola's case, and very similar in the fact that, the initial work that's done is sloppy and incomplete. And so they're doing sloppy and incomplete work before they decide to convict. Well, that's not fair. Why don't you do your work ahead of time and let this guy live his life, and then when you've decided, well, maybe it wasn't him, then he isn't affected by it. But instead, they're jumping in, ruining your life, and then they come back later after somebody's had to pay for this, additional forensic exam, and, oh, okay, well, we're sorry. Go on and be happy, working at McDonald's. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Back in New Zealand, it's decision time for Tim Jenkinson. His lawyer, Andrew, who has already given Tim up to $100,000 worth of free legal help, is willing to keep battling. But as a hearing date finally looms, he says the prospects are looking a bit brighter.
Teachers' Council have decided that they're going to proceed with charges. It might be very minor charges. They relate to two things. Firstly, they allege that when inappropriate or pornographic images popped up on your screen, that somehow you looked at them too long, and that was unprofessional.
The Teachers' Council is also saying Tim failed to take appropriate steps to ensure there was adequate protection in place when the pop-up started. But Andrew says he believes the Teachers' Council now accepts Tim's claim that it wasn't deliberate.
This is the first big win for you, because there is now an official acknowledgement by the Teachers' Council that you did not actively access pornography whilst at school.
Tim, although relieved, wants reassurance. Are the Teachers' Council really acknowledging, he asks, that he did not surf the net for porn? Andrew's in no doubt.
They said absolutely, that is not the charge. Our experts and your experts agree that this was not a deliberate act and that you are the victim of viruses or Trojans. So I think that's a huge acknowledgement.
The Teachers' Council won't comment. The grim reality for Tim is that he can't get his untarnished reputation back. In some people's minds, he'll always be suspect.
And meanwhile, my life has been destroyed, basically, over something that never happened. Well, something that I didn't do. So I'm of two minds. I still haven't really decided, and I don't know whether I'm in an emotional state to be able to do that, to be perfectly honest, to make a reasoned decision.
Tim is going to take the weekend to think things over. There's a deal on the table which would let him keep his teaching licence if he agrees to plead guilty to some kind of reduced charge. It's been dragging on for 2 years now. Vicky is ever the optimist.
Even our boys, they've just said, the truth's going to come out, and that's what I'm holding on to. That the truth will come out, that justice will be done, and we'll be able to get on with our lives.
In Connecticut, as fate would have it, Julia Mero, with a possible 40-year jail term hanging over her life, is facing exactly the same dilemma: to keep fighting or strike some kind of deal so the pain can go away. Shortly before Christmas 2008, Wes and Julie decided they'd had enough of the ordeal that's ruled their lives for more than 4 years.
The state was willing to drop all of their charges if we would accept a plea deal. And that plea deal was for a misdemeanor charge that amounted to a speeding ticket, is how they put it initially. A $100 fine, and we would go home and it would be over.
But presumably it wasn't for a speeding fine, it was for something else.
No, it was
disorderly conduct.
Yeah.
And a $100 fine and the taking of my teaching credentials.
Right.
Forever.
That was brought up just before we went to...
that was one day. We had 1 day to think about that.
They went to the courthouse in Norwich, Connecticut, where Julie pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge, paid the $100 fine, and surrendered her teacher's license. And you can never teach again in this state?
Never in the state of Connecticut.
But that's not to say that she couldn't teach somewhere else. But you know what? In this state, you don't want to be a teacher.
I wouldn't teach here anymore ever again to begin with. Not after this.
Will you miss teaching?
I will miss the children, and I believe the children will miss me.
Back in Auckland, Tim Jenkinson faces the same mind-numbing choice. He can hold his head high, confident now in his own mind that he didn't deliberately access pornography. But in order to make this all go away, he'll have to admit to the Teachers' Council Disciplinary Tribunal that when the porn pop-ups appeared on the screen, he looked at them.
This would be analogous to someone walking in the room and putting a picture under his face and then walking out again. It's not a deliberate act, and he has acknowledged, as the statement of agreed facts acknowledges, that perhaps he did look at them too long while they were on his screen. However, even at that point, it must be at the lowest end of offending.
Tim gets to keep his teaching licence. He has to agree to continue getting medical help for his stress.
It's somewhat of a Pyrrhic victory to an extent because, you know, you say my career's ruined and all those, but the reputation takes a long time to repair.
This case should never have been taken against Tim. And as I said, if the school had done their job properly in day one, it never would have been taken. Instead of jumping to conclusions and reaching ill-informed decisions about something they knew nothing about. So no, there's no celebration. Tim's got nothing, he's lost everything.
Tim finally got another job, doing relief work as a music teacher at Whangaparoa College. His sense of unease goes on.
I'm really worried for our primary education system. Males are leaving in droves and are not even attempting to go into the profession any longer. And it's nothing to do with just money. A lot of people say, well, they're not paid enough. Well, it's partly that. But there are other things now in society as men are often seen as possible predators. And it's really sad. I think it's really sad. We've lost our balance.
Unless the bodies that are charged with investigating and prosecuting these offences actually start to educate themselves properly, then absolutely. In fact, I have another one.
Another case like this?
Yes.
A case, Andrew says, which in its own way is even worse than Tim's. A woman teacher this time.
They simply found the pornography and assumed immediately that this person must be at fault, and acted accordingly. In fact, when I asked them to produce their forensic report into how this happened, they've now told me that they're going to go and get one.
We employ well-respected forensic experts, and our expectation is that if the case was contested and that there was expertise from the other side that suggested there were any issues about our forensic exploration and examination, then they would be contested and we would be found wanting. But to date, that has not happened.
which kind of begs two questions. First, if the Price Waterhouse report showed Tim's computer was riddled with viruses, why did the Teachers' Council still pursue him so vigorously? And secondly, how many other teachers are at risk of baseless allegations of downloading porn?
Tim Jenkinson was incredibly unlucky. If there was a 2005 report we saw which suggested that, or stated that half the primary school principals in New Zealand were surfing the internet with no protection whatsoever on their computers. Tim had a virus checker, he had content filtering, he had all the right stuff. He also ended up with something penetrating those firewalls and content filters, installing itself on his machine, and then a virus party broke loose. So he had the good stuff. Half the principals don't have any of that.
It was perhaps entirely predictable that the story would not be totally over for Tim Jenkinson. At his new school, Whangaparoa College, some students looked up Tim's details on the internet and spoke to a teacher. Within a couple of weeks, it was being suggested Tim had behaved inappropriately towards female students.
The first one was just a reach across on a shoulder and encouraging him because she was doing really, really well in her singing. Another one, I was actually sitting at the piano and I reached across and she was doing so fantastically well. And that was that was a touching incidence. And then the speaking, I made a completely innocent remark. I don't know how it could be misinterpreted, but it certainly wasn't intended inappropriately, and it certainly was not intended in any other way than encouraging the child to develop a talent. Because they're children, for goodness sake.
At a meeting with the college's principal, Tim and Andrew Hooker say Tim was offered money to keep quiet about the matter. Not so, says the college. It was a genuine offer to resolve the issue quickly.
And if it means that I cannot touch or give an encouraging pat or a hug to a kid who has done well and they absolutely stand up and build up based on it, well, perhaps I don't fit teaching anymore.
Whangaparoa College says there's been no formal complaint about Tim. The so-called concerns about him were raised by staff, not by students. Tim says the concerns only emerged after someone looked up his name on the internet.
It seems too much of a coincidence to me that events that were reported were of some time ago, and all of a sudden, 2 weeks after this stuff had come out and people had realised it, all of a sudden these complaints came forward. Yes, it's beyond the realm of coincidence to me.
Tim is unemployed again. He's thinking of moving his family to Australia. And what about the rest of us? Is there a way of better protecting ourselves, our families, our computers, our reputations? Tami Loehrs, one of America's most experienced IT investigators, says everyone is vulnerable to viruses and Trojans.
On one hand, you have the virus protection software that doesn't know it's there. On the other hand, you have the viruses that the first thing they do is disable the software protection because it's been out there a long time. If I was a good virus writer, that's the first thing I'd do. Let's go ahead and turn that off so it doesn't even know I'm here. So it disables your software protection, and then you're being hit.
Only recently, police in New Zealand have been warning people about inadequate security on their home wireless networks. There are drive-by downloaders out there surfing your street for a Wi-Fi connection. And once they hook into your network, they can flood your computer with the porn they may be downloading.
Within this building, we could detect about 120 wireless networks in our area, and I would say that 80% of them are not secured properly at all.
Mike Fiola in Boston, Julie Amero in Connecticut, and Tim Jenkinson in New Zealand are all counting the cost of trying to work with 21st century technology that turned against them. All things considered, it seems highly unlikely they'll be the last victims of this kind of cyber trap.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.